So Gypsy takes place also in dystopian future. There you are. God, you're right in front of me. I'm so sorry. Also in dystopian future. This is only a couple hundred years in the future. There's been like 3 or 4 more world wars that have happened. This is like supposedly the last one has happened about 100 years before this story takes place. So society has rebuilt itself, and it's beautiful architecturally in a classic way. But I'm kind of going for it's like gilded cardboard. Like nothing is stable, nothing is lasting or permanent. It's just beautiful. So that's the city where this is set. That's what they're called provinces in this story. So that's what all the provinces look like. And then there's groups of people called gypsies who live kind of outside the provinces because they might have a physical defect, they might be disabled in some way, or they might be tainted, hence a tainted age. Multiple meanings in that, which means that because of the radiation left over from this war, their blood was tainted. And now they have these abnormal superhuman abilities, which we think is like awesome, but in this world it's not okay, and it's not allowed. If you can be a gypsy, but you can't be tainted. If you're tainted, you should die. Like they should execute you if they catch you. So if you're tainted, then what you want to do is hide that. So the best way to do that is to join a gypsy caravan. And so this story centers around a girl named Dell, full name Claudel, but she hates that, so she goes by Dell. And so she's tainted. She's been with the same caravan, a very small caravan of about 4 people. And the start of the book, this isn't giving anything away because it's literally on the first page, the leader of their caravan, she assumes, is dead very suddenly. He dies in a very tragic way. He's also her best friend, the only friend she's ever had in her entire life. He found her when she was about 8 years old, and he was 12, and kind of raised her a bit, kind of like an older brother. So as far as she knows, he's dead. I'm going to read to you guys from chapter 5, which seems like it's kind of far in, but it's not that far. The first couple chapters are pretty short. So in this, they're going back to visit their friend Richie, who's an adult. And the gypsies don't tend to have many adult friends because as a gypsy, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to live into being an adult. So he lives in this gypsy camp, in this gypsy town called Maryanne, and there's not many gypsy camps either. And most people don't stay in the town, so he's kind of the mayor, so he has a little bit of authority. He's super awesome, kind of weird. If it's a movie, I want Paul Rudd to play him. So they're staying with Richie right now, and he has a proposal for them, and so that's kind of where it leaves off. So if you guys are cool with it, I was going to just read you guys a little bit from chapter 5. Yeah? Okay. No, here, I should probably show you guys the character name first. Okay. Because you're like, who is this? What's going on? Okay, so originally about Richie and Dell. Jag is about 14 years old. He's a member of her caravan. Steffi is 5 years old. She is mute and blind. Okay. I dragged Jag out of bed and gently coaxed Steffi awake. She couldn't manage to leave her scratch alone, so I knew it was probably itching like crazy. At least it wasn't hurting. I tried to convince her to stop scratching it, but she clearly didn't see any logic in that. Jag repeatedly claimed that his wrist barely ached. I really wasn't sure whether to believe him or not, but I accepted his answer anyways. I didn't know what else to do. I used the bowl of water Richie left on the table to clean Steffi's face, and as I dipped the rag back into the bowl, I caught sight of the necklace Richie had given me the night before. I had rolled over it the night before and taken it out of my pocket without thinking, tossing it onto the lower bunk. I snatched it up now and looped it around my neck on a whim. Although my small caravan looked as put together as we did on our best day, I felt hollow. I didn't voice this, though. I just tried to smile encouragingly at Jag as we struck out for Lynn's place. Morning, Richie greeted us with a cheery wink as we approached silently, Steffi holding my hand and tilting her head back and forth to catch all the noises. Before we could answer, he continued, I'd like you to meet Keel. Meet what? I asked uncertainly. Not what, Richie corrected, stepping aside. Standing behind him was a rather skinny boy with messy black hair, probably around my age. His slate gray eyes took us in only briefly before flitting uncertainly back to Richie. Keel, I would like you to meet Dell, Jag, and Steffi. Richie introduced us as he herded us towards the table outside of Lynn's shop. I sat down awkwardly on one of the benches and helped Steffi sit beside me. This was the same table where Alice and I had sat when we saw Jag for the first time. I quickly pushed the memory away and tried to focus, wondering who Keel was and why Richie wanted us to meet. Steffi reached up and felt for my sleeve, grabbing a fistful and tugging on it. I looked over at her and she hugged her stomach. I touched her shoulder reassuringly and looked up to find Richie watching us with mild curiosity. What's wrong? He asked, gesturing to Steffi. She's hungry. A provincial woman would never have admitted she was hungry, but we weren't provincials, so we got to keep the luxury. It was probably the only luxury we had that they didn't. Provincial women eat this stuff that's supposed to taste amazing, but doesn't have any nourishment. It's expensive, even by provincial standards, So you can always tell when someone is wealthier because they look like a thin layer of skin stretched over a skeleton, with a gruesome mask painted on that vaguely resembles a human face. Of course, they have to take medicine to keep themselves alive, but apparently it's worth it to them. Gypsies aren't like that, though. When we find food, we take it. Most of us can't afford cosmetics either. Not that we would want them even if we could. We would probably just use the money to buy more food. I could feel Keel staring at me, but when I looked directly at him, he looked away, glaring at the rusty metal of the tabletop like he found it offensive. I raised an eyebrow at Richie. Who is this kid? He was so pale that I had to wonder if he'd ever experienced sunlight before. Not that the sun was out very often. I stubbornly kept my mouth shut and waited for Richie to speak. It was an uncomfortably long time before he did. He still hadn't spoken when Lynn brought food out a few minutes later. Jag nudged me in the ribs with his elbow and I shrugged, not looking at him. Jag wanted to know who this kid was just as much as I did. The only reason I hadn't already picked up Steffi and walked away with Jag was because Richie seemed to trust Keel, and we trusted Richie. I really hoped he wasn't about to give us a reason not to. Lynn eyed me suspiciously as she set a bowl of soup-like substance on the table. In my memories of her, she didn't look nearly as cruel or starved. The last 8 years hadn't been kind to her. I took Steffi's hands and put them on either side of the bowl. She nodded and picked it up. Thanks, Richie, I said, watching Steffi drink down the somewhat questionable mixture with apparent pleasure. Of course, he responded cheerily. I raised an eyebrow and my eyes drifted back to Keel. He was staring at his soup in consternation. I looked down at my soup as well. There were chunks of something floating around in it, but that wasn't unexpected. I followed Steffi's lead and downed most of it in a few seconds. Suspicious as the ingredients were, it still tasted better than powdered chicken. I refocused my attention on Keel. He'd been watching me again, but he quickly averted his eyes and continued to stare at his soup, leaving it untouched. His left hand tapped the table nervously as he fidgeted. Something about him seemed familiar, but I was sure I'd never met him. I stood up abruptly and said, Jag, stay with Steffi. Richie, I need to talk to you. Richie smiled suddenly, like he'd been waiting for me to say exactly that. I frowned and walked away from the table. I turned around to make sure he was following and then put some more distance between ourselves and the table, keeping in sight of them but out of hearing range. Who is he, Richie, and why do you want us to meet him? I asked sharply. I can see you're wearing a necklace, Richie commented suddenly, his gaze resting on the blue bullet hanging just beneath my collarbone. I flushed and quickly tucked the bullet into my sweater. I'd forgotten I was wearing it until that moment. That's not what I asked, I complained, looking towards the table again. Who is Keel? Where's he from? Richie crossed his arms and smiled at me. You have a theory, don't you? Of course I do, I snapped. I didn't like that he wasn't telling me the truth, and I really didn't like that he was smiling about it. Well then, let's hear it, Richie said amusedly, following my eyes to the table. I watched as Jag slid his bowl back and forth across the table, from one hand to the other. Steffi sat on the bench, her feet swinging above the ground as she finished her soup. Keel had finally ventured to taste the soup and didn't seem very happy with the results. I peeked at the dirt for a second and thought about it. It felt like Richie already knew what I was going to say, and he probably did. Finally, I stopped squirming and crossed my arms, looking Richie directly in the eyes. He waited. He looked calm, but now I could see the anxiety in his eyes, masked with more amusement. Is he a provincial? I asked, lowering my voice. Yes. I immediately stepped away from him. Even though I expected that answer, it still felt like I'd been slapped in the face. You tricked me, I accused, jabbing a finger at him and glancing towards the table. No, Claudio, Richie said sternly. I didn't trick you. I never said he wasn't from a province. Which one? I asked, still feeling betrayed and not bothering to hide it. Which what? He replied, raising an eyebrow. Richie? All right, Claudio, all right, he muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose and glancing at the table where Keel was now looking our way. Just calm down. How did he find you? I asked impatiently. He didn't, Richie said with a rueful smile. I found him. How? The same way I found you. I stared at Richie for a moment. Was he trying to make me feel guilty? I examined him for a moment. No, that wasn't it. He was being honest. What brought a provincial like that out here? Is he tainted? I asked with a sigh, finally overcoming my initial frustration. Is he genetically screwed up? He's not, and you'll have to ask him where he's from, Richie said, nodding towards the table, indicating that we should go back. I looked towards the table to see that Jag and Keel were both watching us now. Steffi was unconcerned as she set her bowl down with a small burp. Fine, I grumbled, turning to make my way back. Richie fell on the step beside me and a thought occurred to me. Why did you want us to meet him, Richie? Because he wants to go with you, Richie said, then winced as I turned to him, my mouth open in shock. I would have protested, but we were too close to the table and I wasn't cool enough to tell Richie exactly what I thought of the provincials, with one sitting right in front of us. Instead, I glared at Richie with narrowed eyes as he sat down beside Keel and proceeded to eat his own breakfast. I sat down stiffly between Jag and Steffi, and Jag whispered, What did you talk about? I waved away Jag's question and put my hands palms down on the table. The provincial's eyes were flitting between Richie and I. Richie was conveniently preoccupied with his soup. Who are you? I asked bluntly. I'll leave you guys with that.
Was there any inspiration for you that just like sparked you wanting to write this and these characters that came to mind?
Well, Dell is very loosely based off me. Probably based off of me more when I was 13. When I was 13, I was goth, guys. So she was based off 13-year-old Ash. She was not the kindest person, pretty judgmental. As you can see, like from that like couple pages, like she is a very judgmental person. And it's not that all of her judgments are wrong. She just is that way. And then I think superpowers are kind of awesome. So I've yet to write a book where a character doesn't have powers of some sort. I just like that ability. And okay, for her powers, did you guys watch Ben 10? Yes. Okay, so you know like when they're like teenagers or whatever, his cousin Gwen, she has like that cool power with like the purple lights and stuff. That was my inspiration for Dell's power because she could control like blue lights and things.
Publishing experience.
Okay.
What was that?
I published through BookLocker, which is, if you know English Spark Publishing, it's an off-branch of that for like young adult fiction. It is a print-on-demand agency, which is really nice because it's not a self-publishing agency where, like you said, like they'll just accept everyone and then like you don't get any like particular help. I would recommend if you're going to like self-publish in any way, never submit to anywhere that doesn't go through like make you go through a screening process. If they don't ask like if they don't reject some people, then the attention they give you is not going to be super individual and it's not going to be worth it. So they had a screening process as well, and they accepted my book. And then, so print on demand is like, instead of going through a traditional self-publishing agency, where they're like, oh, you must print 1,000 copies, and we will charge you for those, and then you'll store them in your garage and sell them as you may, if they ever sell. Print on demand is more like they only print a book when someone orders them, kind of thing, or if a bookstore orders them and like wants to keep them in stock. So that's nice because it's not a ton of overhead, and it's actually manageable, and it is quite affordable. So that's kind of why I chose BookLocker, and I like the reviews that I got. And, yeah.
And you said that Barnes & Nobles, is that online or is that actually?
Online. Because until I have better numbers for my book, I'm not going to be able to get it into a bookstore. Mm-hmm. There's a place in Oregon now, it's a coffee shop, but they want to carry my book, so that's cool. So one coffee shop in Oregon will be carrying my book.